We are families, we are caregivers, we are parents to children with disabilities and medical complexities. We are rarely familiar. We get together to learn, to relate, and to laugh a lot while we share each other's unique family experiences of raising the rarest of the rare. Our goal is to unite, inspire, educate, and empower people living a rarely familiar life. And we're so glad you're here. Hi, welcome to Rarely Familiar. This is Haley here with my friends Tram and Jen, where we dig into the realities of raising the rarest of the rare. Today, we're going to get familiar with how it's possible to use your voice as a citizen and create a bill that actually is passed into law. It can happen. And we're going to talk to Sarah St. Louis, who helped facilitate that process from the very start to, well, it will always continue, right? The work is never done. But before that, Tram, Jen, we always check in. How are things?
We all got together on Sunday for an event put on by Brave Souls, which was a chalk event in Andover, Minnesota, which is way north of Minneapolis. And they had all these great chalk art in the back parking lot area. And we would go to each one, take photos with our kids. There was music, there was food, there was vendors, and we all three got to get together with our three littles. It was great.
Yes, the highlight was Sparky the Unicorn. So,
Sparky the
right?
Unicorn.
There's so many good photos with Sparky the Unicorn.
And the weather was so nice and cool this weekend.
Okay, so we are driving home from the Brave Souls event, my oldest and my youngest, and we get a call. And I usually don't answer the phone while driving, but I'm like, oh, I just had this weird feeling. So I grabbed it and they're like, hey, this is so-and-so from Brave Souls, the chalk event. And is this Jennifer? And I said, yes. And she said, Julian won the snake. And there was a big raffle. So there was all these big stuffed animals. And
Felix wanted that
vendors.
snake so bad.
We never win anything. It is a 20-foot snake. They're like, can you come back? Because there's no way we can mail this 20 feet at least. And we had to shove it into our car. And it was just hilarious. We have great photos and video. So anyway, that was a fun win from a day that we normally don't win things. So that was cool. But yeah, Haley, you had a big win this week too. Do you want to share that?
It's not a big win, but I'm part of this committee to help plan the Rare Disease Day event in March. And we were all talking yesterday, and I felt like I did a lot of talking on that call because there was so much to unpack because they were inviting the voice of lived experience. And I was just so excited that I was even invited to be on this committee. And then we were supposed to nominate speakers. And I was like, oh, you could talk to this person, talk to that person. And then today I was like, did I just make a complete fool of myself? You know, I talked so much on that call and I was like, you know how you have that moment where you're just like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And I feel like I was very validated in that that was not the case. And this morning when I got an email from the guy who runs that group, and he nominated me to be one of the keynote. And I was so humbled and surprised. And whether or not the rest of them vote me in or anything doesn't matter. I was just humbled to be nominated by the guy who's leading it. So
Congrats.
That is
That's great.
amazing.
Very
March-
validating. We will mark our calendars for
March
March.
6th, the Rare Disease Day event at the U of M.
When you said they voted me in, I felt like you were having a survivor moment.
Yeah. So
Oh my goodness.
So let's dig in. Let's introduce our guest. So Sarah St. Louis, and I kind of love that. I just love saying your last name, Sarah St. Louis. I have been in your circle. I have been in your presence several times, but I don't think we've actually met. And so I'm super excited to have this conversation today because we can ask all the things. I'm going to have you introduce yourself, but I know Sarah from leading the charge for changing spaces and getting adult-sized changing tables turned from a bill into a law. And it is an incredible accomplishment. And I'm so glad you're here. What can we learn from you? Hopefully something. So tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do on a day-to-day basis, what fills your cup. Oh, as yours.
Yeah. So my paying job is I'm in architecture. I'm a project manager for architecture for a local firm here in Minneapolis. And I'm also a certified ADA coordinator. So I do a lot of stuff. All my unpaid job is in the disability world, helping to create policy, helping to do education for other architects and designers and builders. And then also I've started at previous companies I've been at, I've started ERGs for either people with disabilities, caregivers of people with disabilities, or people that are just genuinely curious about disabilities and how to be allies to that. So I do a lot of stuff with that. I'm also a trained support parent and board member for the board of directors for Family Voices in Minnesota, which is a great nonprofit here in Minnesota helping families with children with disabilities. And oh my gosh, I do all kinds of stuff. I just want to stay out of prison, really. That's well, I stay busy.
Do you have a fun fact that you can share?
Oh, well, one day when I was in Costa Rica rock climbing, I got stung by a scorpion several times because I thought it was a twig in my shoe. And then I
God.
broke a rib all in the same day. Rock climbing. So that was super awesome.
That's horrible.
I'm terrified of scorpions.
I am too. I've never been bit by one, but I am terrified. I've seen people who have been bit, and it's very scary to watch.
So
Yeah.
wait, how
In
do
my
they solve that problem? Do they give you a shot? What is the
Well, the Costa
antidote?
Rica I was in was not very habitable. So there was like one doctor that they weren't sure if she was around or not. So I took a ton of Benadryl and drank a lot of caffeine and it helped. So I didn't swell up or anything because we were a really long way from a good hospital.
And then you broke a rib.
And I broke a rib, my folder, one of my folders. Yeah. So that hurt.
My goodness.
Oh,
You're hardcore.
Yes.
That is a fear of mine. So, we ask every guest this question: what is your tie in to the disability community? And you kind of shared that with the work that you do. But did you grow up knowing anyone with a disability? Like, is there any past history of that for you personally?
Well, growing up, I grew up in a time when they put those with disabilities in a separate part of the school. You didn't really see them. You knew they existed, but you didn't really interact with them. And growing up in a very rural part of Minnesota, those with disabilities just really weren't seen in public. But on February 6, 2013, my youngest son, Ezra, was in a car accident with his daycare provider. She wasn't allowed by the state to be transporting him. It wasn't part of her license. And she bought a used car seat, which is against the law in the state of Minnesota, and didn't install it correctly in her vehicle. And then she took him somewhere and ended up wrapping her vehicle around a pole on the side that he was on. So he acquired a severe traumatic brain injury, subsequent seizure disorder, cognitive disabilities, and physical disabilities. He went from a happy go lucky, average 20-month-old to not sure if he was going to live by the end of the day. So we've come a long way in the last 11 and a half years. He lost every ability he'd gained in those first 20 months until we had to learn how to breathe, how to hold our head up, sit up, crawl, walk. Now he doesn't shut up. He's pretty good at running and he's an extra neurospicy teenager now. So it's a
Oh,
lot of fun in our household these days.
So
So
he is your why, right?
he's my
And
watch.
and I think what's remarkable about your situation, although tragic, what you have done from that tragedy and from that place of like, we could go to downward spiral to that place of despair, or we can choose hope, right? And how can I make this better in the future for someone else? And that's exactly what you did.
Right.
Um, and we want to learn a little bit more about how the idea for Adult Changing Table started. Like, what was the impetus for that?
Well, one of the things that happened when my son had his accident, he wasn't quite potty trained at that point. The average male child that's non disabled in our country isn't fully potty trained till they're 4. But he was not able to be potty trained until he was probably 6 or 7 years old. So we had to do diapers. And when we go places, the only places to change him were on the dirty bathroom floor, the back of our vehicle, behind some bleachers or wherever it was that we were. It was just everywhere that wasn't dignified or safe or sanitary because he didn't fit on those infant changers. I gave birth to hardy Minnesotan children and they outgrew them at 1. And so,
Mhm.
just had he not become disabled, we still would have had to change him on the floor, which is just gross. And one day we were at a therapy session and they had kind of like a therapy table in one of the bathrooms. And I was like, this is ingenious. I can change him on here. I don't have to put him on the floor. I'm like, why doesn't everybody have this? And in 20, I started Partners in Policymaking. And I learned that I had powers and knowledge that I could take this idea. And at that time, my son was potty trained, but nobody else should have to do this. And we all know now that 1 second can put us back in that place. And so I'm like, I need to do something about this. I'm going to create a bill. I didn't really know
But you
100%.
could have sat back, right? You could have sat back and just accepted your fate. Like, well, this sucks. I've got to change my kid on the bathroom floor. And that could have been your trajectory. And that's what you do, right?
Or, yeah, or you could have said, I'm past that stage, so it doesn't affect me anymore. So I don't have to worry about that. Like most people, no, I don't have to deal with this anymore. But your awareness around, oh gosh, there's a lot of people who are still, like I have a 14-year-old who's in diapers, and I can relate to you with the dirty floors at gas stations in the middle of nowhere and in the back of my Subaru and outside my car. We've all had this shared experience, obviously, right? But it continues for many of us, like myself. So,
Right. Especially those of
yeah.
us in this community. Like Trum has a story. I have a story. We all can benefit from this, but you didn't see yourselves as, just here's my only. It's thinking beyond that to the greater good. And what is the thing that doesn't just affect me, but can affect everyone? And that's a shift. I think a lot of people just stay in that, like, woe is me and I'm a victim and oh, that sucks. But you took it and saw an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I struggled the first few years, definitely, after my son's accident and not knowing anything about what questions to ask, anything about the disability world, really. You knew it existed, but you didn't know how tough that world is and complex that world is until you have to do it. And just because we were fortunate that Ezra was able to be potty trained doesn't mean that our fortune is somebody else's. And nobody else deserves to be put on a bathroom floor. I mean, it's gross. And it's just that part of it and being very fully aware that just one incident can put us back in that place. When I was in college, I worked at nursing homes and hospitals, and a lot of the people that lived in those facilities needed help with changing and stuff. And so there is a point in your life that I might need that for myself. And I don't want to be put on a floor. That's gross. So what am I going to do about it? And as I started having these conversations with people, I found out there's a lot more people that are in this situation than I thought. And so that's what really inspired me to write that bill and start building that foundation of people to get the word out and to help more people realize that this is something really important to do because we don't talk about the bathroom very often.
No, absolutely not. Anything like below the waist, we can't talk about that.
Could before we go into how the bill went through the process, could you explain to the listener visually what is an adult size changing table for those who are not familiar? Can you just walk us into the bathroom and tell us what it would look like to have this in a space?
Right. So there are a couple different types of adult size changing tables. The kind that we promote are adjustable height. So they are attached to the wall and then they can go up and down so that you don't have to lift people as much or that there's that physical barrier for that. And you can move them to their chair, to the table. But there are like those stationary tables like that one that I found in Gillette. And so it's kind of just a standing kind of table at, a certain height and you put them, but you're going to have to lift people. We also kind of promote to have ceiling lifts if at all possible, because then that helps also with,
Strain on the caregiver, right?
yeah. And
So it's a
so,
private room that only you go in. You can lock the door.
yes. So in Minnesota, we differ from the ICC 2024. Adult size changing tables is in that. That's kind of like the federal building code. for the country, but it's up to each state to adopt it. But in Minnesota, ours are in the family assist restrooms going forward. So that means any public space that has 6 or more plumbing fixtures has to have family assist restroom. So in this restroom, then you'll have the table. There are certain clearances that you have to have for that, and at least 36 inches clear on the one end for somebody's chair and what have you. It also has to have a toilet and a sink. And then there are a bunch of other requirements of having paper towels or a hand dryer. We obviously recommend paper towels because things happen, and having an appropriate garbage disposal because we all know infant diapers don't smell good. They don't smell better when you get older, and some other different things to be able to have in those, but they're single ones so that we don't want them in gender specific because there's a lot of issues, as we know, in our nation about people with bathrooms not using a bathroom that somebody thinks they should. And then it also allows for parents to go in with kids and, your spouse or family members. And then it just helps the disability community.
Yeah. And I think we were talking earlier about the fact that I'm a mother of a male child. And what do I do? Do I bring him into the female restroom or the male restroom? Like, I don't want to have to think about that. I just want one place for me to go. And so I want to get into a little bit more about the writing of the bill. Like, I wouldn't know where to start. All I can think about is Schoolhouse Rock. But how did you even know how to? Was it partisan policymaking? Did they teach you how to do this?
Yeah. So partners in policymaking really help with the different stages of government, everything from your local school board up to the national level and the different branches and how bills work their way through. And so when I graduated, I had a friend, she had done a little bit of work. She'd been working on the TEFRA bill for, ever. And so I called her because she was the only person I knew that really knew how to do this and understood why I wanted to do this. So I wrote up what I wanted in the bill. And this was back in 2019.
You just wrote a Word document, just like, here's what I think it should be.
Yes. So that's what I did. And I knew a senator, John Hoffman. He's a big champion for the disability community. So I just called him and said, "Hey, John, you want to support this bill?" And he was like, "Sure." And then I had my own personal representative that I had talked to several times, Kelly Morrison, who was a House of Representatives, and then she was our state senator, and now she's running for Congress. But I got her to sign on it in the House. So then the bill has to be presented. And once it gets its jackets, which means then it's an official bill, it wasn't just my Word document anymore. It was a official bill.
That had other people saying, this has merit, right?
It,
Has
it gets a
value.
bill. It gets a number, and then the legislature writes it up and looks at the details. Yeah.
So I want to back up a little bit further, even. You've had this, oh, I know a senator. If you didn't know a senator, like, how easy is it to make that connection and to make that relationship?
Well, I encourage people to always get to know who their representative and senator are because you're their constituent. They have to talk to you. If you hang around the Capitol or go to different events, we start to meet some more of these people. So you don't have to get somebody from both parties to sign on.
But that's
Both.
helpful, right? To get, Democrat and Republican support, right?
It is.
I mean,
It is.
that
It just kind of depends on the makeup of your legislature, whether, are they equally divided? Then you got to play that game a little bit more of getting that bipartisan support versus if your team has the majority, then it's probably a little easier to just go with one party and get it through. So sometimes it's about when do you bring this bill? So in 2019, we started meeting some other people. I just kind of put out a cold call on Facebook saying, "Hey, I did this bill. I need some people to testify." And Trump answered, she's like, "I've never done anything with legislation. I don't know anything about this." And I'm like, "That's okay. All you got to do is just tell your story." And so we had a hearing in the House, and we were having a hard time in the Senate because it was a split legislature at that time. And so, we did that. And then before we could get another hearing, this thing called COVID happened. and basically shut down everything that wasn't about COVID or essential government business. So everything just got scrapped. So my timing was not great. And so when I started this, I was just looking for moms to tell her story. So during COVID to 2023, when we got the bill passed, we worked to expand our group and expand that knowledge. And, kind of playing that game of when do we bring the bill back? Because we still have the split legislature. And then in 2023, we had just one House, Senate, and governor were all Democratic. So the bill got brought back and made it through the House like super quick. We didn't even have hearings so much. But it with the Senate was a bit of a battle. And so since we had kind of diversified our base a little bit, it wasn't just moms anymore. It was people that worked in healthcare. It was veterans. It was spouses. It was individuals with disabilities that needed this table to happen.
You
And so,
start to realize that how many people this is actually going to help and serve. And like you said, you had a myopic view from the beginning. You kind of had your blinders onto your own situation. And then we can start to see as we bring more people in, how many more people this is going to benefit.
Trump, can you tell us what the experience was like for you testifying? Do you remember what you said?
So I would say it's scary, but actually at the same time, nobody knows your story better than you. And Haley, you asked the question of how do you meet your people that are your legislators? So when Sarah sent out that Facebook message, I did say, I've never done this, but she did coach me. She just said, what's your story? And so then I did a little, here's what my story is. And then she's like, yeah, that's great. Maybe add in why you need it. And so aside from Sadie, my dad had gotten sick and I was like, he would have needed it had he survived. And I saw firsthand who needs it. It was just speaking about my story. We did a write up. There were three of us that went for that first time, me, you, Sue. And so I would say this, what it enlightened me to is I would advocate everybody to follow a bill. And there's a reason why government is the way it is and how things don't get done because it is a long process. It goes through several committees and everything sort of was even last minute because Sarah and I would ask, oh, when's that committee hearing? And we wouldn't know until the night before. Not only is it a spoken testimony, but you can write into your testimony, sending it into the name that they have. And I think that was very helpful was to know that, okay, I can do this. I can tell everybody why it needs to be done. But I would also say the other thing that you can find your legislators is if you go onto each of your government state sites, you key in your zip code and it tells you who represents you from the House of Rep side and Senator side. So then you just start writing them and you start calling them and you start telling them why it needs to get done. Because if you don't have a lot of voices, then they just think it's a small, minor issue. The more people that wrote in, the better. And like Sarah said, I asked people around me, Haley, I asked you, I was like, can you send in a testimony letter?
And I pushed it
And
out to my network and I had
yeah,
my PTA right. So because there's power in numbers, right?
right.
And the least you can do is take 3 seconds to just bang something out.
One call, one email, one letter represents 30 constituents, 30 people, correct?
Oh, is that what it is?
That's
I
kind
know
of the
that.
formula. Yeah, that's what I've
Or
heard.
more. I think that so few people take the time to do this. It
Yeah.
really means a lot.
I do want to take a step back, Sarah. So tell me though, you had to done schooling to become an architect, and the schooling is quite long to become an architect. You probably have been going to conferences. And until you saw this firsthand, it's crazy that no one had ever brought it to a conference like, hey, this is a need that needs to get done. And that's why buildings keep getting built without them until people know that there's a need for it. And I often say, I didn't know this was needed until I needed it for Sadie. Tell us what an ADA coordinator is, because I don't think some people know what that is. And then I think you've lightly mentioned how you have been teaching about this as well, real quick. And then we'll get into how you got that bill passed.
right. So a certified ADA coordinator, you have to apply for this. You got to do a lot of different classes and different things like this. And then you have to take a big test. And once you pass all that and pay some money, you can become a certified ADA coordinator. So there are different things that an ADA coordinator can do because there's 5 titles of the ADA. So, some people will do employment, Some will do state and local government or public, telecommunications. Different people find different niches, and it can vary on what they do. Some have it as a government position, others do consulting, and others do education or just because they want to have it. So for mine, I use it more for education, educating other people, but then also in architecture and how we look at plans and the accessibility because, Title II and Title III, which is state and local governments and then public entities, affects my jobs. When we design spaces, we have to meet accessibility codes and meet the ADA, or at least we're supposed to.
I want to
Mm.
define too, just for anyone that's unfamiliar, we're starting to use acronyms and look, um, can you define for us what the ADA is?
Yeah, so the ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was signed into law by President George W. Bush on July 26, 1990, after decades of disability advocates fighting for rights to be a part of community. And so they finally got that passed. And it's the bare minimum of the accessibility code is when I speak to architects. The accessibility, you're always allowed to do better than code, right? That code is the absolute bare minimum. And so if you think of building code, if you were to do the bare minimum to build a house, you would end up with a single wide trailer with one 36-inch door to go outside and one egress window, which is very small actually, in the bedroom. You don't need anything fancy in there. You don't need all these things, but that's basically about what you have. And nobody would pay an architect to design, a very bare bones trailer house, right? So we always do better than that. So why are we failing on accessibility? Because the ADA was designed around a World War II male white vet that weighed about 170 pounds, was 5'10", that had full mobility of their upper body, just couldn't use their legs. And they used a very tiny 1950s Evans Jennings manual wheelchair. And so that doesn't reflect the disability community at all. But everything about the accessibility code is based off of that. So when you have the heights of the grab bars in the bathroom, they're the same in the men's as they are in the women's. But the average height of a woman in the US is 5'4", which is 6 inches shorter than the average male. So the code doesn't really reflect
Wow.
us. And
I
then
think I think this is really interesting in terms of the lived experience, right? Is only your own lived experience or that of the person that you're representing and until we get more voices at the table, how can we like you said, do better, make it more inclusive, think of all the things instead of just that one person's view, right?
Okay, so now let's jump into you wrote the bill. And so then you got your legislators to stand behind it. Now then, what happened?
when we came back the second time, we had a different senator and a different representative. We had Kim Hicks and Liz Bolden. And Kim got it through the House like with no help, really. She just rocked it right through. And then Liz, she had to stick it out with us for quite a while. And like Trump said, we'd maybe get 24, 48-hour notice if we were paying attention to the legislative calendar. And so we'd have 24 hours, 48 hours to rally the troops. We need letters. And so it came up with like a form letter where basically people that wanted to email a letter in, they could just take this form, fill in their name, fill in the part about their story. And we kind of filled in the rest and they could just send that in or
The
they could send.
easier you make it for people, the more people you're going to get to do. And with limited time and with our own chaos of our lives and our kids, there's very little time. So the easier you can make it, the better. And I think, what are you just sitting around waiting for these hearings to happen?
So we got lucky. So at the first committee meeting, there was the Star Tribune writer, Chris Ferris, and he was listening into the testimony. And he then reached out to Sarah and was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was a need. And so thankfully, he wrote the article And then we also found the Changing Spaces campaign website that had already set up, like, here are the form letters, here are all the things that you can do to help. And so having those link, and then we built our Facebook page to help us get these candidates. So we get the word out to all of the people that's affected to get those testimonies in. I would say if we didn't have that avenue, I'm not sure we would have gotten as much support letters as we did. So that
Yeah.
helped out too.
And then we had WCCO. They did some stories for us. We started working some of that media stuff. So that's like another part of it. I had to diversify my pool of people, and we had to be diligent on when these committee hearings were happening. But then we needed to include the media to get the story out. And we've used them several times since and to get the word out that the bill was here. And then when it got passed, and then when we've brought that momentum refresh to the state fair, the totally inclusive, accessible, mobile restroom for people to use. And so we've used the media for that too. And so it's gotten a lot of support. And because we did the story last year on that momentum refresh, this year had, what was it, a 44% increase in people using it this year because they knew it was there and they heard the stories. And so as people are becoming more aware, it's like, this is great.
Tell your people about it. I'm just talking to everybody at the state fair. We're riding the accessible bus from the parking lot to the state fair, and I'm saying, make sure you visit the bathroom in the back.
Yeah.
What bathroom? What? No, with the whole truck. All it is a bathroom, and it's the best bathroom at the state fair. And you're
Issue bath.
oh, amazing, right? But because you can stay all day at the fair.
Every day.
Mhm.
And that was the whole point. It's supposed to be the Great Minnesota Get Together. So we should all
Yeah.
be there together, right?
I
Um,
think for the bit, so also when we were getting all of this and we were getting the letters in, it was amazing. So this is where I would advocate as a citizen. You should see if there's an issue that is very important to you to follow it along because in the committee meeting, I was quite surprised when someone was reading the words that Sarah had written and then had already been updated with the authors, but someone was literally like, change that to the, change this to that. And so the
Oh my gosh.
language,
I remember
right? I think the other part of getting the bill passed is it has to get voted on in the House and in the Senate, and then the wording has to match.
yeah,
And so, talk about that when we were just like watching it because sure, it passed, but then we were like, oh, nope, kicked back again to work
yeah,
in progress.
our bill got put into an omnibus bill, which is a big bill that a lot of different little bills go into to get passed. So they're not doing one bill at a time because it is really a lot. I think it was part of the Health and Human Services bill. And it got put in there. And then the House or the Senate, one of the two had changed something in the wording. I think it was the Senate. So the Senate had to go back and rewrite it so it looked just like what happened with that. It had nothing to do with our part of the bill, but our bill was in there. And so all this testimony, I mean, there were hours and
Do
hours.
you have to go all the way back through the process again? Do they like send you to the
No.
back of the line?
They have something called like a conference committee where all the bills kind of go. So they finalize all the wording so it matches the House so that they can each vote on them because each side has to vote on the exact same bill before it can be passed into law. And,
Mhm.
we listened to 6 or 7 hours in the House. And then in the Senate, it was like 7 hours. I listened to the whole thing. And I'm just sitting there tooth and nail as they're doing this. And then finally it passed. And I was like, oh my God. And then Governor Walz had a big celebration on the front steps of the Capitol to sign a bunch of the bills, including ours. But the problem was is that I was down in Kansas City trying to finish my stuff for the a coordinator certification. And so Trump was live streaming it to me so that
You
I watched.
Oh,
when
that's so
Walls
awesome.
pressed it? Oh,
I was like, why can't he do this on Friday? I'll be back.
Oh my gosh. And when was this?
It was May 23rd, 2023. And so I was a little sad. I had to miss it. But, Trump made sure that I could watch. And I was sitting in a class that was super boring. And I just started crying. And people were looking at me. And I was like, Bill passed.
I keep
It's
saying you're like
amazing.
the
Yeah.
beauty human of Minnesota. You made it happen. That's a huge moment.
When I hear of people, finding these tables, using these things, or like the momentum refresh, it gets to me and I tear up because it started out just helping my child and realizing that you didn't have to be on a floor, and it's turned into something so much bigger. And so many people are benefiting from it and will
Yeah.
continue to benefit from it. And as we learn where these tables are, we have a interactive map on Changing Spaces, Minnesota, to show where these tables are across the country so people can plan trips and different things. The ones that we
Okay.
know about.
But there are so many things we will link to in the show notes. How to find your representative, all of this stuff, I think is so important. And I learned so much following this process along and doing as much as I knew how to do at the time. I watched it and I saw it and it happened. I came in right at the tail end, but I didn't know what an omnibus bill was. I'm learning these things, how easy it was for me to call up my representative and they actually picked up the phone and takes 5 minutes to write a letter. There's so much you learn through following this process. And this is one issue, right? There are so many out there for our community. And I think what I love about your story and what you did is the fact that it can happen, right? It's a success story. So whenever the parent that says, God, it shouldn't be this hard, right? Um, there might be another success story out there, but you have to just start somewhere, right?
You
Yeah.
don't have to know everything. There's going to be
Right.
people that are going to help you along. And I think that's where people get really overwhelmed. They don't understand that they have power and, they just have to want to act on that power to change a situation. And you will find people that'll help you along the way. You don't have to do it by yourself. I had Kelly and then I found Trum and I found all these other people. And so it wasn't just me, it might have been my idea, but a lot of other people had that idea too. They just didn't know what to do.
Well, it's that cliche, right? It takes a village. And it is like, well, we are, this is our village. But how do we keep building community that can like activate, right? Okay, there's this thing, put it out there. Let's go, write all the letters. And it's
Good
good
reminder. Yeah.
grassroots effort.
Yeah. And
It's a
so
good
we all learned
reminder.
about it
Yeah.
in school, and then we put it away on the side, and then it came back into fruition. And so, and I will say this, we are only one of 4 states that have this law. And that's the sad part, is that it is state by state. So we still have work to do, right? There's retrofits that need to come in because it's only for new buildings that fit this minimum
Or,
6 water
or
closet. Right?
significant remodels that affect the
Yeah.
restrooms.
Yeah. So we still have work to do. So anybody who wants to help, please check out changingspaces.com. We have a Facebook group site, Minnesota Changing Spaces page. If you see a table, submit the table because we cannot go everywhere and find these tables, but
And
it
pictures.
helps the community. So, and I think that's what Rarely Familiar with. We created this podcast to help and, empower, unite, and inspire people. And so we're hoping that you get inspiration from this story.
My takeaway is that idea and taking the first step. And then the second step, you get support here, you get support there. That's a great reminder. Thank you so much for doing this for our kids and the greater community. This is wonderful.
Yeah. And if you get knocked down, just get back up. Like,
Exactly.
you get told no, but somebody's going to say yes. You got shut down because of COVID. That would have been an easy excuse to just walk away. But this diversified and grew and kept going. So I think that's the thing in just supporting people and
Yeah.
supporting each other.
Don't take no for an answer. Like, just keep asking, keep knocking. The door
No is
won't
a
close.
soft yes, as my 10-year-old will say.
As the woman who survived a few scorpion bites, she kept going.
It was a pleasure to finally talk to you. I am so inspired by you, and whatever we can do to continue helping, we are absolutely there to do. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye, Sarah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. If you liked today's topic or have comments, questions, or thoughts on what else you would like us to cover, please visit rarelyfamiliar.com or connect with us on all the social channels. Resources will be listed in our show notes, and we'll be back next time with another discussion around living life successfully with rare medical complexities. Thanks for joining us on the journey.